I got the chills. Wow. Let me wake up from this dream now. Man, that was unbelievable.
That was fun.
Did that just all come from,
That was all just.
or was that something you played
in the
before?
moment. That was all just in the moment.
Man, I mean, I've got goosebumps all over.
You were my muse, Craig.
This is incredible to see it live. So, what also blows my mind is that while you are a master composer, you're a polymath who has so many other skills and stories. You're an award-winning photographer. You're an entrepreneur in the tech space. You took your first company public when you were, what, 27 years old?
27, yeah.
So this is like a side gig, but you know, it's become a passion that has sparked moments like I just had in people all around the world with the shows that you play and these meditations that you lead.
Yeah.
We're gonna dive into all this. I'm so excited.
Let's
Thanks for
jump
coming
in.
on the show, man.
Let's jump
Yes. Murray Hidary.
Hey,
Thanks for being on the show, man.
great to be
Thank
here.
you
Thanks for having me.
as the inspiration
So I
for the
hear.
show, Greatest Stories Never Told.
Awesome.
Because you and I did a really brief interview in front of a crowd of people, what was that, a year ago now? And the stories that came out of you were just like, I mean, you'd expect them to be stories of Crocodile Dundee or
Right.
something like that, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, you must be the definition of Renaissance man. I mean, you certainly are for me.
Thank you.
So you're an award-winning photographer. You've exhibited photographs everywhere. You're a composer who played in front of crowds at Central Park and on the beaches of Malibu and
Yeah.
Carnegie-type halls and things like that. I don't know the terminology, as you can tell. But top of all that, you were a big part of the dot-com boom, taking a company public when you were 27 years old,
Yeah.
which you then flipped again. And man, I can't wait to get more of these stories today. So thanks
Cool.
for being here, man.
I'm excited to share.
Yeah. So you grew up in New York City?
Grew up in New York City. I grew up in Brooklyn, where lots of great people have come from. So I'm proud of that lineage.
Okay. And were you born with a piano attached to your hands?
Just about.
Because you just blew my mind.
Just about. I started playing when I was really young.
Yeah? Like before 5?
At 5. So yeah, I started playing the cello and the piano at 5 years old.
Wow.
And my mom was really keen on all of her kids having music in their lives.
Was she a musician?
Well, no, it's actually, she wasn't, but it's the kind of thing where, you know, when parents didn't have something in their life when they were a kid, a lot of times they'll make sure to bring that into their parenting.
Gotcha.
And so she wanted to have certain things when she was a child. My grandparents, for whatever reason, you know, it didn't happen. And so when she had kids, she made that happen for all of us. So all my siblings, we all play instruments and have music in our lives. And I kind of took it to kind of at the next level in terms of professionally and performing.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you started playing the piano, cello, gravitated towards the piano.
Yeah.
And then where did the tech thing come from? Because you
Right.
are a fucking mind-blowing piano player.
So thank you.
You're so good, you make me even not even be able to say the word piano anymore. You're making me stutter.
So ever since I was a little kid, I really always had kind of a passion to create and build things. And you know, music was certainly one of them. When I was in high school, I was already starting to kind of display the tendency to want to create my own music as opposed to play the music of others. So a lot of pianists want to perform, you know, the greats, you know, Chopin and Schumann and Beethoven and Mozart. And I certainly study that, but at the same time, I felt like I had my own thing to say with music. And I think in particular, it's because I was a really shy kid. I had a very internal world when I was a kid. And, you know, there's just kind of endless memories that I have and even photographs to corroborate this of me staring out windows of cars and buses. And there's even one story of my school bus driver. So we got picked up in the morning and dropped off in the afternoon by the school bus. And this one time I was just kind of lost in a daydream, looking out the window in my own reverie. And the next thing I knew and I was probably 5 or 6 years old. And the next thing I knew, we were back at the bus depot. And the bus driver was exiting the bus, turned around, saw me there, and was like, "Murray, what are you still doing in the bus?" And he had totally missed my stop because he had no idea I was even on the bus. I was just lost in my own world, and I didn't get off at my stop. So, and that happened more than once. So,
Wow.
there's
Same driver?
same driver.
Okay.
Frank,
what
Frank
was
the
he
bus
doing
driver.
to have
Frank
you
the bus
to
driver.
not notice
Yeah,
multiple
who
times?
had the screwdriver to discipline us.
Oh, man.
yeah. He'd keep the screwdriver in the the door opener mechanism, and he'd keep it right in there. And we always knew, don't mess with Frank.
Would he like wave it? And,
Yeah, he'd
and
threaten us with the screwdriver, and I don't know what he was going to do with it, but anyway. So he then had to drive me back to my house in his own car, and my mother was like, where was he? But I really had this very very vivid internal imagination as a kid, and it was harder for me to express myself verbally, and so music was a natural language for me as a kid.
Ah, okay.
So emotionally and creatively, it just allowed me to express myself. So I would just spend countless hours at the piano in our home, just kind of fooling around on the piano and finding my own melodies and harmonies. And eventually in high school, that developed to be a little bit more sophisticated. And then I knew I wanted to be a composer at that age in high school. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. So speaking of shyness, there's two kinds of musicians when it comes to the ladies. There are the go to band camp and you're not talking to the ladies, and then there are the musicians that are spitting the poetry and not as outward as the jocks, but like all the ladies are coming to them. So what was your dating life like back then?
Interesting. That's a very good question. So when I was in college and I was studying music and literature and all that amazing stuff that great romantics are born of, I remember that my college roommate, one of my best friends, he would constantly take my book of poetry and that I would write and my own work, and he would pass it off as his own to the girls he would meet, and then we'd have concerts in the house, and and he would bring them, and he would just pass off all this material as his own, and I would find out later that he had done that, but I wasn't so offended. I just asked him, did it work? And he had quite a success record. So,
wow. So you were the ghost writer for
I was his ghost writer. I was his ghost poetry writer, and so it seemed to work. But yeah, I really kind of was in my own world for many years, and music was something that was very kind of holy to me and very special to me in that way. And it was not just my voice, but from an early age, probably 16, 17, it then became kind of my pathway to understanding the cosmos and the universe on a greater scale, because it allowed me to feel and touch something kind of transcendent. And at that same time, I started to really dive into spiritual and mystical readings. So one of the first books I picked up was Wave the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman, and then that led to Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, The Alchemist by Paolo Coelho, and it just went on and on from there. And I got immersed even in denser and denser Buddhist texts and Zen Buddhism in particular, and I just went on a very deep kind of journey and pathway, studying Krishnamurti and many others.
Yeah.
So, and that whole world, that whole mystical journey into something kind of bigger than myself, started to merge with my classical music training. So that's why the music became this language to express those ideas that I was learning about. And so that's where those two worlds start to fuse, right? And if we come full circle to what I'm doing today out in the world, I'm bringing this kind of message of music and that whole world of mysticism in one kind of visceral experience that's communicated through music, but is informed by many different kind of world wisdom traditions.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah, your music has a very healing, mystic, journeying element to it. Right.
So and it's intentionally so. It's because it originally was created to heal myself, and to not just to heal myself allow me to express those emotions, and then allow me to kind of feel deeper states of consciousness, explore deeper states of consciousness that are not available kind of in our ordinary kind of running around of life.
Yeah, no doubt.
And that's something that I started exploring at quite a young age, and it's been really the greatest gift for me in my life. And now my day-to-day work is about sharing that experience with others, so hopefully they can get a glimpse of what I have as well.
Love it.
Yeah.
So did you go to a music college, or was this a regular college where you were doing
Yeah.
ghost
So
writing?
I ended up going to New York University,
Okay.
and I studied music, classical music and composition.
Okay.
I had an amazing mentor, Paul Levy, who I'm still in close touch with today, and see him pretty often when I'm back on the East Coast. And so he really kind of took me under his wing, and I learned so much. Had the privilege of meeting Philip Glass, one of our greatest American living composers. He's one who pioneered the whole minimalist movement, along with Steve Reich and Terry Riley, and that became a tremendous influence for me. It turns out that he had also gone kind of in this path of being influenced by, in his case, Tibetan Buddhism, but Eastern traditions nonetheless, and so that was another deep influence. I got to meet him and study briefly with him and share my work with him, and now I see him. He's in his mid 80s now, and we get to have that kind of reflection looking back on those days. But I mean, that was an amazing story, because I was studying at NYU, and I used to go to this vegetarian restaurant on West 4th Street called Quantum Leap, appropriate name for what I was interested in at the time. And I would always sit there alone, just kind of doing my work, having my lunch. And this one day, and the waiters all knew me there. And so I get this tap on the shoulder by the waiter who was helping me out. And he said, "Just want to let you know, Philip Glass is sitting behind you." And I was like, I was 20 years old, right? So
Okay.
I'm just like, my jaw drops, and I'm like, the great Philip Glass is sitting behind me. So I very casually, kind of nonchalantly turn around, and he's sitting alone having lunch as well.
Oh, alone. Nice.
Yeah, and so this is a very casual kind of in and out, quick place. And so he then gets he asked for the check. I turn around, I say hello. We have about a 5-minute conversation. He asked me about my, what I'm studying and all that, and it was a very nice conversation. He gets up and leaves, and then I said to myself, that was amazing, but I want more. That wasn't enough for me. And so I threw some money down on the table, and I had my backpack, and I remember I rollerbladed there. Yes, we rollerbladed in those days. So I grabbed the rollerblades, threw them around my shoulder, and in my socks, I ran down the street where he was walking. I caught up with him a block and a half later at a red light waiting to cross, and I just said, "Excuse me, Mr. Glass." And he was like a little startled, like, "What?" And then he recognized me again, and he was like, "Yes." I said, "I really would love to show you my music, and if there's any way to do that." Now, there's no email, there's no internet at the time that we had access to. So he gave me his phone number, and he said, "Give me a call. Here's my address. You can drop the music off." And I'll never forget. I have his phone number memorized in my head today. I don't want to say it on the air.
Might still be
it might still be the same, actually.
Yeah.
So, but it's burned into my memory from that moment.
You're like, I cannot forget this. If I lose the note,
exactly. Yeah. And I remember dropping the music off, and then spoke to him on the phone. He invited me over, and we had an incredible, many hours together. And
so he liked the music.
He liked it. I sat at his piano where he wrote Einstein on the Beach, where he wrote all his incredible, pioneering music. I sat at the same piano in his study, in his home, and talked to him about the music and about just life. And it was really what a 20-year-old needed at the time.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And I love that the power of mentorship can transcend so many different spaces.
That's right.
And it's an interesting segue, because you and I met through my mentor in
That's
business,
right.
Evan Pagan.
Yeah.
Though
wonderful person, yeah.
The best. You were on stage speaking to a room full of entrepreneurs about how to scale and exit businesses.
That's right. Yeah, at his altitude program.
Yes, that's right. I think it was 2008 or 2009.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so how do you go from mentoring under one of the greatest composers to doing big things in the tech space?
So I graduated from NYU. So here I am studying. I had studied classical composition. And I'm like, okay, how am I going to make any money with classical music? And I said, okay, well, I'll be a teacher. Okay, that's what a lot of people do when they study that. They go on to being a teacher. So I started teaching. I had about 20 students, mostly kids.
Were you teaching at a school, or you just
Privately.
put, like
I was teaching privately.
things on a telephone pole, like grab
Pretty
this
much.
number if you want a
It was
lesson?
word of mouth, calling
Okay.
people, I was from New York, so I knew people knew me. And I started teaching kids, piano, music appreciation, really the love for music. One of the things I really loved doing was I said, okay, most of these kids are probably not going to be professional musicians. The most important thing I wanted to impart on them was a love for music that would last a lifetime. And so that meant it was not just about the technical aspects and reading the music, and all that's important, but it was about really developing that intrinsic connection with music as a language of expression. And so one of the exercises I had them do is, we'd go, say, to the backyard of the house, and I would give them a big pad, blank sheet of paper, and a bunch of pencils and colored, pencils. And I would say, okay, I want you to just sit and draw on this page what you think the wind is doing. And they would, draw some kind of lines or shapes. And I'm talking about little kids, from 5 to 10 years old. And then I'd ask them, okay, every time you hear a bird, do something on the page. Whatever you want, just do something on the page every time you hear a bird tweet. And they would do that. Every time, I said, okay, now look at the trees. Whatever the trees are doing in action, I want you to reflect that on the paper. Do something on the paper that, is the trees, the movement of the trees. And we did all these things with different elements. And if a car went by, they do something with the car. All these different elements. And then we go back inside at the piano. And I'd place this sheet of paper on the piano stand, on the music stand. And I'd say, okay, I'd like you to play what's on the page. And the kids would always look at me like, first, like I had 12 heads, like, what are you talking about? There's no music on the page, there's no notes. And I didn't have to say much for them to start to interpret what was on the page. And all the critical lessons of music they got through this exercise. They would understand the gestures of the birds, and they would represent them on the piano somewhere. They would understand the wind movements, and they would start doing things louder or softer inherently without me having to tell them that louder might be more intense or a stronger wind than playing softly might be a lighter wind. They would intuitively get all these things. And they were essentially discovering it for themselves. And so we would do exercises like that.
I want to do this exercise, just hearing about it.
We could do it after.
Yeah, okay, all right.
So things like that, which really imparted that love for music. But after doing that for almost a year, I was like, okay, this is really cool because it gives me flexibility and time to write my own music and kind of do what I want to do. But I realized that I'd never make enough money to actually realize the dreams I had, because you don't make that much teaching kids music. And maybe it'll pay the rent and some utility bills, but I wanted to see the world. I wanted to travel. I wanted to experience. I wanted to create things. And that wasn't going to be the path for me to do it. So I said, okay, well, what are my alternatives? And so I said, okay, a lot of composers with my degree would go into writing jingles for commercials. And I was like, that's just not for me. It's just not what I want to do. I would speak to some of them, and 10 years, 15 years would go by, and they hadn't written, their symphony. And,
Right, but they get stuck in something that pays the bills.
And so they're on deadline all the time, and they get paid well, so they have a good material lifestyle, but they're actually not writing the music they really want to write. And that almost seemed like a form of hell to me, right? Like you're writing music every day, but not the music you want to write. And so I said, wow, I'd almost rather not even write music. I mean, so I said, well, that's not the pathway for me. And at the time, my dad, we have this family business that my grandfather started. And so he had always, kind of lightly pressured me to come into the family business, which was the children's clothing business. They would manufacture in China and then import and sell it in, stores like Kmart and Walmart and other big box retailers. And so I had worked there part-time as a, teenager, but I'd never really given it a shot. So I said, you know what, let me give it a go. I'm 22 now. If I don't try it now, when am I going to try it? Let me give it a real shot. I can make kind of a good entry-level salary, and then I can work my way up as a family member in the business. And I had cousins who worked there, my uncles. I mean, the whole family worked in this business. right in the heart of Manhattan, a fashion district. And so I went to my dad on a Friday and I said, I'd like to come to the business. It was one of the greatest days of his life. He was beaming. He was like, really? He's like, okay. He's like, because he thought he was like, I had this musician son. He's never going to come into business. And he said he was elated. And he said, okay, when would you like to start? Like next month or, a few weeks? And, tell me when. I said, no, I'll start on Monday. So it's kind of like the way I am. If I decide something, I just kind of drive towards it. So I came in that Monday. He gave me a cubicle in the office. And he said, okay, we'll start training you in different parts of the business. And soon enough, I was going to Taiwan to check out the factory. I was going to Kmart on sales calls, and I was really learning the business. After a few months of this, I realized this is not the pathway for me. I got along with everyone. It was, it was a great environment, but it wasn't engaging my creativity in the way that I wanted. And so there was no fulfillment in it for me from that point of view. So I really kind of felt stuck now. Like, okay, now what am I going to do? So I was on the phone with my older brother Jack, and just kind of sharing my frustration with him and trying to think like, what's my next move going to be? Like, what do I do now? And he says to me on the phone, and he was at the time living in Washington, D.C. in Bethesda area, and he was working for the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, which is our government, funded research, medical research. And he was doing schizophrenia and neuroscience research there. He was on a pathway to become like a research doctor.
Okay.
And so we get on the phone and I'm sharing with him my kind of frustrations. And he says, almost in a whispering kind of secretive voice, he says, have you heard of the internet? And I was like, now you got to remember, this is like 1994. Okay. 94.
This is before the AOL discs were
That's
everywhere.
right.
Okay.
It's 94. And he's like, have you heard of the internet? And I was like, I think I heard of it. Can you remind me? Maybe I read about it. And so he says, I'm coming to New York this weekend. We'll talk about it. I said, okay. He comes to New York and we go to a computer in my dad's office and he starts showing me all of these different online databases. This is pre-web even. This is before Tim Berners-Lee actually created HTML, hypertext markup language, which brought images and text together.
Oh,
it was
wow.
just
This
text.
is just data,
It's just data.
Matrix type.
It was
weird
just
shit.
data
Zeros and ones. Okay.
that people were sharing through this connected network of computers. That was the beginning of the internet. It was what the government, from a defense point of view, what DARPA created as a kind of fail-safe for communicating if there were to be a devastating nuclear attack. If any one communication center was taken out, there were other pathways for communication to happen in this vast network of interconnected computers.
Oh, that's what the internet was made for.
That's what it was made for.
Back
in
backup
like the
for
60s.
phone lines.
Yeah,
Oh,
backup
no kidding. I
for
didn't
normal
know that.
communication, so that there's no central hub that could be taken out.
Okay.
So they needed communication to be able to reroute in many different pathways, no matter what. And that's what the internet is. It's a bunch of computers with pipes connecting them, wires connecting them, and you take one out, it goes around the other way. You take this one out, it goes this way. So it's multiple pathways. So that's a great fail-safe mechanism.
I always thought it was a very enterprising cat video producer that made the internet. He's just making great cat videos. I just wanted to get him out there.
That's the real truth, but that's
Okay.
most people don't know
This
that.
is the government takes the credit.
So he tells me about this, and we were like, wow, this is really like incredible. What's available here that nobody knows about? And at the time, there was a civil war in Rwanda back in '94. It was a devastating civil war, and hundreds of thousands of people were being killed and displaced and refugees, and it was really a horrible situation. And we were talking about how little information there was, even in the New York Times and other newspapers, about the relief effort, right? So there's one thing about the fighting, but what about the refugees, millions of people that are displaced, and what's happening with them? And that wasn't, to our estimation, covered enough. And we said, well, okay, we don't have a newspaper or anything like that, or a TV channel, but this internet thing could be something that can get the word out to people in a new way. And so we started approaching these organizations that were actually helping on the ground there. So we're talking about CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children. All these organizations were on the ground in Rwanda helping out with relief efforts, but no one really knew what they were doing. And so we contacted them. All their offices were either in New York or Boston or DC. So we kind of split the list up and went to visit them. And we said, we want to use this thing called the internet to share information and create awareness about what you're doing there, so more people can find out and get engaged and hopefully get involved. So the first question was, what's the internet? And of course, I'm now a newly minted expert in what the internet is because my brother just taught me about 5 minutes ago. And so I would explain it to them. And they said, well, what's the cost? I said, no cost. We're just going to do this because we think it's a cool idea and we want to help out. So they said, sounds good. So they started to send us a feed of information from the ground in Rwanda. And it would come via fax. Right?
Oh, wow.
It would come via fax.
Okay.
And to a fax machine in my cubicle in the family office that I was working in. So on the one hand, I'm taking phone calls from Kmart, and at the same time, faxes are coming in from Rwanda about efforts that are happening there.
Oh, wow.
At the end of the day, all the employees in the company, in my family's company, including all my family members, would leave at around 5 o'clock. And we would then hire a part-time coder who would come in after that. And we would then take over the office and start to do this project. And we called it ReliefNet. And basically, we took all these faxes from all these organizations, we re-scanned them in, coded it, and put it up on these databases. And we did this day in and day out. And then when we had meetings, we said, well, we can't have people come here and see all this clothing around. So we literally would cart out the racks of clothing from the conference room and put them in the back. So when people came, it was just like a normal conference room, and we'd have our meetings. And then then at the end of the night, we'd roll the clothing racks back in so that in the morning, nobody knew what we were doing. And
awesome.
so that's what we did. And very quickly, buzz started to grow about it. And Newsweek wrote a whole article about our efforts. And before we knew it, tons of people were checking this out. And then around that same time, Tim Berners-Lee, who created HTML, so now we had the first websites, right, with graphics and text. All that was what we know today, right? Then Netscape came around, right? All these different technologies were coming out just at that time. And so we created ReliefNet as this relief effort website. And Newsweek wrote about it, and then we were like, this is great. Imagine what we can do in the actual profit world, right? Not just in the nonprofit world. So we spun that out as a nonprofit, had some volunteers run it and continue it, and then we created something called EarthWeb, which was the company that my brother and a friend of ours started together in the mid-90s, and we built that up and eventually took that public in 1998 in a record-breaking IPO. So it was quite the journey. But the conversation I had with my dad just a few months in to doing this, he was starting to get wind of the fact that we were, distracted by this project. And he's like, where's your focus? What are you doing?
Yeah.
And I said, I just had kind of a level set, and I was like, Pop, this technology is so exciting. Here's what it does. Explain the whole thing to him. And he looked at me and he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he goes, you have such a great opportunity here. And it was a tough conversation, but I really was excited about this potential pathway. And remember, this is not a time when we all knew that tech was going to make lots of money, and it just, none of that had happened yet. So all it was a promising kind of frontier. And whether there was gold or not, in California was, yet to be seen.
Yeah.
It was just burgeoning and just starting to happen. But it was just so exciting because it really tapped into my creative juices.
Yeah.
And even though I was not a technologist, my brother was more of a technologist, but it wasn't about technology. And I don't even think today the internet is actually even about technology. It's really about possibility. And it opened up so many new ways to create new business models, new ways of doing business. And so to me, Amazon, for instance, today is not a technology company. They use technology, right?
Right.
But there's something different, right? And same with many, many other, of the great companies we have today. So, so my dad was a little disappointed, but he was like, okay, I give you my blessing, do what you need to do. And then we went off and got our own space. My brother actually left the NIH, just as I left the family business, and we got an office. He moved back to New York. He and my friend Nova was in Boston. They both moved to New York, and we all lived in my studio apartment on little futons for a long time while we were getting this off the ground. and literally like a one-room studio, not a one-bedroom, like a one-room studio, 3 of us. And
Wow.
yeah, it was something else.
Oh, wow.
And then we got our first office and raised our first money.
Did some money start coming in before you went public, or was that like it was kind of bootstrapped and then windfall?
So when we created EarthWeb, because the web had just come out, the first thing we did was we said, who needs to be on this thing called the World Wide Web, the internet?
Okay.
And I immediately thought of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, because I said these collections of art should be seen by the whole world, but they're not. If you don't live in New York or visiting New York, you don't get to see them.
Yeah.
And so we actually cold called the Met. We got a meeting with the CTO. The only reason why we got the meeting, we found out later, because when we first went to his office, he was like, how did you even get this meeting? You know, a bunch of 20-somethings got a meeting with the CTO of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And it turns out that his assistant is a woman that had recognized our last name from the high school that we went to. And she was just being nice and got us in to the calendar.
Oh, wow.
So
Just
it
got
was
lucky.
just a lucky thing. We got on the calendar and we prepared this incredible presentation. We essentially mocked up a whole website, scanning in hundreds of images from their physical catalog. And then we showed him this whole thing. And the first thing he says to us is like, who else has seen this? Turns out it's illegal to scan in all of these pictures and
Oh, really?
post
Because of
them.
forgery and things
Whatever,
like that?
copyright.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, okay. And anyway, we ended up getting the account. We created the website for the Metropolitan Museum.
Oh, so you guys built websites. At
We
the end of the
built
day,
websites.
you just became one of the very early websites.
Wired
builders.
magazine rated us as the #1, website creating shop in the country.
Oh, wow.
And we would build these multi-million-dollar websites. It eventually became that.
Yeah,
so
for very prestigious
the
institutions
Metropolitan
or
Museum, the New York Stock Exchange,
Oh, wow.
Bertelsmann, BMG, all these big organizations. We built those web presences for them. Very intricate legacy systems, e-commerce, like all the stuff. We pioneered all that.
Yeah.
And while we were doing that, the language of Java came out from Sun Microsystems, the programming language Java. And that really changed things because the promise of Java was to write once, run anywhere. Write once, run anywhere. So instead of having to write stuff in multiple languages for different platforms, you code it once and it will work on multiple operating platforms.
Gotcha.
So that was a real cool thing. Turns out, though, that a lot of programmers, a lot of tech people, it was just hard to learn the latest and greatest about it. And we said, why don't we make the resource for developers? So we created this website called Gamelan. And just like the Gamelan Orchestra of Indonesia is an ensemble, we essentially created an ensemble of all the Java code that was out there. And so people can now come learn about Java, what other people are doing with Java, and it was an indispensable resource for the development community.
So you had your own like house websites as well.
Exactly. So we
wow.
became essentially, because we were creating it
Media
for ourselves.
company as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's when we got into the media kind of game.
Wow.
And then we had advertisers and sponsors. So Sun Microsystems was sponsoring us, and other companies started to sponsor us. And we said, okay, well, if Java programmers need this resource, well, what about other kind of programmers need their own websites for their own world? And we eventually built out a whole network of websites for techies, by techies, for techies. And we eventually had several million tech people as a part of this.
Oh, wow.
And that's what we went public as this media company.
Oh,
And
so
we
it wasn't as the website building
and
company.
we
it was
shed
as
the web. We realized
Okay.
that being a website builder as a service company wasn't going to give us the same
Yeah.
kind of growth and multiple.
And by that time, it probably had gotten competitive.
And then it got more competitive. So we said, okay, we're going to leave that behind and focus on being a media company that was ad supported and being a media organization. And so that's what we went public on.
Okay.
And with the promise of kind of building this media company. And it was a really tough time because as we were doing our roadshow, actually just before the roadshow, but we had our prospectus, the whole market for IPO shut down.
So the dot-com crash happened during
Not the
your
dot-com
roadshow,
crash.
or-
It was pre that. This was in '98.
Okay.
There was a dry period, and so no companies were going public. eBay had gone public earlier in that year, and then there was just this kind of dry spell, and everyone was pulling their IPOs and waiting for the right time. Meanwhile, we were kind of ready to go, and we looked around the table at our board and everybody, and we said, and our bankers, we were, by the way, the first IPO that was run by JP Morgan. They were their first tech IPO, sorry, internet IPO. And we all looked around and we said, you know what, we think we have a compelling and different story. So we want to go forward no matter what, even though it's kind of not the best environment. We felt we had a differentiated play, more business to business than it was kind of a consumer play like an eBay or Yahoo. So we went forward, did the roadshow, and we ended up going public on November 11th, 1998, 11/11, and it was a record-breaking third biggest jump in the single day IPO, which was remarkable for the times.
Wow. Was that a life-changing financial moment for you?
Beyond a life-changing financial moment.
So
it was the defining moment.
Wow.
And we actually had the first trade that was done on the exchange. My brother and I were there with my dad, and he was there with us as the stock posted its first trade. And then we all watched together. So side by side with my dad, we watched together as the stock went from 14, 18, 20, 22, 25, 30, 35, 48 on the same day.
Wow. And you're 27 years old.
27 years old.
And when did you start the company?
I was 22, 23.
Wow.
Yeah.
So 4 or 5 years
Yeah.
to ringing the bell and watching it go
Yeah.
wild.
And my dad, who just 4 years earlier
Yeah.
was having the conversation like, you got a good thing here, and
Yeah.
and was like not really sure what this tech thing is, but now he turned to us, he said, okay, I think I get it now.
Wow, that's so
it
awesome.
was a beautiful family moment that we had as well. Yeah.
Wow. So then, money not being an object, could you go pursue the composing again?
So composing takes such intensity to it. So the thing I was doing throughout that was two things. First, I was maintaining my music by playing every day.
Well, I guess you'd have to stay sane with all that wildness going on,
That's exactly
right?
right. So actually, in my office in New York on Park Avenue, we had this really beautiful office overlooking the whole city, and I had a grand piano in my office. It was actually a gift from one of our investors who had done very well, and he was moving, and he had a piano that they weren't going to take with them, and he just sent it over to my office. And so this grand piano shows up in my office, and I'm like, oh my God, it's amazing. And so in my office, I had this piano, and I would play at the end of every long, crazy internet startup day. And it really helped me maintain my balance, my sanity, and just play. And everyone in the office all knew that, I was doing music all the time, but it was always on, later part of the day, in the evenings.
They probably needed it too.
That's right. And,
Maybe that's why your music's so healing. It's because you're in such a stressful time having to.
Absolutely, I felt it. I've felt it all.
Yeah.
So I maintained that, and I also was actively pursuing my photography at the time because making art photography, you can do it in kind of chunks in periods of time. So I can work on it on weekends and at nights, and take a trip for a week here and a week there, and develop my body of work. And then I had an agent that would help get it into galleries and shows, group shows, solo shows, and that didn't even require me to be there. I mean, I go for the opening, but I don't actually have to be there. So it was the perfect art form to do while running these tech businesses, because it didn't physically require my day-to-day 9-to-5 job. And so that's what I did, and developed a really incredible resume of photography accomplishments.
What kind of photos were you shooting?
So I always thought when I was younger, I wanted to be a National Geographic nature photographer. I was really passionate about that, and travel the world with a camera and all to do that. But something really changed for me many years ago on a walk that I was taking. It's one of the most seminal moments of my life, and I was taking this walk through the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens, one of my favorite and special places, having grown up in Brooklyn and New York, and I used to go there very, very frequently. And I was taking this walk at the time, with my girlfriend and another friend, and I had my camera with me, as I always, took around everywhere with me in case, something I want to shoot. And as we're walking, this late afternoon sun, golden hour, this beautiful light, and this tree in front of us on the pathway is just glowing, just beautiful light coming off of this tree. And there's the perfect amount of wind. So it's not moving too violently, but it's just kind of shimmering in the wind back and forth, with this beautiful light hitting it. And I just froze in place, staring at it, just taking in this incredible beauty. And at first, my instinct was to just take my camera and photograph it and capture the light in that moment. And that's what I would have typically done. But something else completely washed over me, completely came over me. And I was just stunned into just being in the moment with this tree. And it kind of sounds, maybe silly or something like that, but I was just frozen in connection with what I was looking at. And instead of seeing the tree as what it physically reflected as, I started to truly see and imagine the movement and the energy within the tree and the leaves. And it just went through me, really went through me. I felt it throughout my whole body. And I said, okay. When I came to in that moment, I said, how do I capture that with a camera? It's because it's something I couldn't see.
Yeah. It's almost like you could see the music in the tree.
I could see the movement and the music within the tree.
You're teaching those kids.
It's exactly
the
right.
sounds of the tree.
It's exactly right. I actually never even made that connection. It's exactly right. And I was like, how do I document something I'm feeling with a medium that's about documenting light, what you're seeing?
Yeah.
And without overthinking it, I just grabbed the camera and I opened the shutter, all manual, and I opened the shutter up and I just started to paint with the lens, with the light that was coming off of it, mimicking the movement that I felt inside that I was seeing. And of course, I was using film at the time. There was no digital film. So it was all actual film in the camera. So you couldn't see what you were shooting, right? We have the luxury today of taking a picture and being like, do it again. I didn't know what it looked like at all. So I just took a full roll of photographs of this one tree. I then had it developed, and I get it back, and I'm in the dark room looking at it, and I'm like it just dropped me to tears, like how much it looked and resembled what I felt inside. And that changed my photography forever. It changed my point of view on things forever, because I realized that within everything around us is this inner realm that's hidden to us. And I then used photography in an almost ironic way, because it wasn't about capturing what we're seeing, which can be incredibly powerful, by the way, right? Great photographs can move us in many ways. But this was about, how do I capture the unseen, right? That which lies within objects, this kind of permeating energy within it all. And that became my challenge.
I love that, capturing the unseen.
And I just started to look at everything in a completely new way. And so I started to paint with the camera and paint with light. And that's what I started to do. And then I built these bodies of work based on that. And so that's what I started to show. And my first agent, when I had my meeting with her, I was showing her all my nature stuff. And she was going like, this is okay. It's good. Yeah, good. And then at the end of the meeting, I almost didn't show her some of these images that I'm telling you about. But I said, you know what, maybe I'll just show it to her anyway. I mean, she'll probably hate it. I don't know. But I showed it to her, and she lit up, and she's like, whoa, where have you been hiding this? And she said, this is fresh. And that's what we ended up going with. And I got to show that in, countless galleries and won some awards and all that. So it really opened up that whole world for me. And today what I do with music really is the same thing, but I use the language of music to express the hidden reality of the universe, right? That's what I'm attempting to do with the music. It's about using vibration, right? So, but instead of light, right, I'm using light vibration to create these images, right? Light is a form of electromagnetic vibration. Yeah. So here I'm using sound vibration, different kind of waveform, but vibration nonetheless, to kind of permeate the nature of things. And so 2 different modalities, same common denominator, same goal in mind. And now in some of my shows, like at Lincoln Center and other places, I'll bring the 2 together. So I'm playing and you're perceiving visuals from the screen. So whether it's in a dome theater, like a planetarium style,
Yeah.
or it's just a huge screen on the stage, there's visuals that I'm syncing with that are all using this original photography that I created, these algorithms that they then move as I improvise on the piano. So the two are
Wow.
in sympathy.
Yeah.
Again, two different senses, our sense of sight, our sense of hearing, and the two are coming together to create this alternate reality.
Wow. So for those who aren't familiar with you, you now do these mind travel meditations all over the world.
Right.
And they take place in wild places like Lincoln Center, but
Yeah.
also I went to one where everyone was at the bottom of a pool and listening to your music underwater.
That's
and you do
right.
silent hikes with
Yeah.
the headphones and sunset concerts on the beach where people dive in and have these new perspectives. So
Yeah.
how did that come about?
So I always felt like I wanted to get back to my music. And, when you are an entrepreneur and you're building companies, and, even after, we took Earthweb public, there were several other companies that I did along the way. And when it's kind of like when you start to get good at something, you start to develop this sense of identity around it.
Yeah.
And then you get into this loop, and then it's hard to kind of break out of that. On the one hand, you see yourself as that, and on the other hand, others see you as that. So
Yeah.
you get into this virtuous loop, right, of projects coming to you, things you want to do, and there's kind of an ease, especially if you have what we call success in something. There seems to be kind of a machine you get on.
That has happened to me over the last few years.
Right.
I never thought I would be a businessman. I always
Right.
thought I was going to be a
Right.
writer, and now
Right.
I'm like,
Right.
this weird.
Right, and then you'll have other
Like,
projects coming to you because of what you've done, and,
then I just
they're
have
tempting,
this
and then you want to
book
do them.
I wish I would
Right.
have written 10 years ago. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I kind of finally caught on to that cycle that was happening. And I said, okay, look, I like the identity of being an entrepreneur, a tech entrepreneur. I've done some cool things. It has tapped into my creativity, but nowhere near the feeling I have when I play and I create music. And I just thought about just my legacy and what am I here for? And it became quite existential. And part of that was the aftermath of dealing with the grief of the death of my sister. So that was a pivotal time in my mid-30s. And something like that happens, it just completely rocks, your world. So there's, dealing with the loss itself, having my little sister at 23 die.
She was only 23.
She was 23.
Oh, wow.
We were traveling together overseas in South Africa on vacation for a holiday, New Year's vacation, and with other friends. And there was just a horrible, tragic accident. She was killed instantly, along with another friend as well. Wow. And I was right there, and I held her. And it's a moment that you would never wish on anybody to experience.
Wow.
And having to call my parents from the highway there, from the scene, to tell them that their only daughter had just been killed. So it was a devastating moment, and it threw me into a tremendous depression. It just cracks you into a million pieces. But as it does that, it also creates the opportunity for cracking you open in a completely new way. And I was really committed to not just getting through it, not just surviving it, but to thriving through it potentially. And I really kind of put my mind to that, using all the teachings I had learned and all the stuff that you have some experience with or learn. You're like, okay, now I got to put it to the test and see if this really works for something this devastating. And of course, existentially, it also throws everything into question, right? And in the aftermath of that, I said, okay, we're human beings and we're here to create and do, and what is my expression? What am I doing? And part of the healing through grief, for me, and it's, of course, grief is different for everybody, but I think part of the process for most people is how do you continue to keep that person alive, their spirit, their energy, in your works, in what you do?
Yeah.
And that became a real kind of centerpiece for me. How will I honor her life by what I'm doing? And I felt like being of service and sharing with the world was something I needed to do in a much deeper way. And I know what music had done for me, how healing it was for me to sit at the piano and to play that pain out of me, to the point in which I was able to transmute that pain into just a feeling of love every time I sat at the piano for her. And I came to realize that the pain we have as we go through grief, the more painful it is, that means it's directly equivalent to the amount of love we have for that person. So if you're feeling this overwhelming, devastating, gut-wrenching pain, the kind in which it arrests your breath, I mean, that level of pain, that means you love the person equally that much. And so I was able to use music to transform that pain into an expression of the love. And that's truly what the music, is for me. And I said, okay, I know what this has done for me. There's so many people that are going through difficult times, whether it's grief or other forms of pain. Maybe this could help them. Maybe this could be helpful to them. I know how helpful it's been for me.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, I need to make this change in my life. And, it's never a good time to make a big life change, especially when you've got a lot of projects going and companies and businesses and, you're in the mix of it and you're at the prime age of your life and you're creating and you're doing. It's never a convenient time. But you got to do it nonetheless. And so I just drew a line in the sand and I said, I'm just going to make this happen. And so I actually moved from New York to Los Angeles because I felt like I needed to manage distraction if I was going to move into this new direction. And so there's so many distractions in our lives to begin with. So how do you mitigate and manage them best you can? Well, just living in New York was an instant distraction every morning because how many people want to see you, want to have a drink, want to hang out socially, business meetings, projects, family, friends, all this stuff going on. It's very difficult to immerse yourself into what you need for a new project. I said, I was already spending a little time in Los Angeles. It was kind of a little getaway for me. I said, that's where I need to be. It's the right environment to really immerse myself because I didn't have all that pulling at me there. So I just jumped in headfirst. I sold my place in New York. It wasn't like I'm going to keep it and go back and I said I'm going to sell it.
Burn the ships.
Had it for 12 years. I'm going to make the move, and then move to LA. And I just would play hours and hours a day at the piano to get my craft to a level that I felt was worthy of sharing it with people.
Wow.
And because it's one thing to play for yourself, it's another thing to share it and make the impact that I was interested in making, right?
Yeah.
So that means you want to be at a world-class level.
Yes.
It's not like I'm going to go play for friends. That's not what this was about.
No, you want to take people on
this
a
was
healing
about,
journey.
I want to connect with someone that doesn't know me. I want that I want them to feel it like deeply. Mm-hmm. So you have to have the technical ability and also just develop the craft. And so I said, you know what? I'm a collaborative person. I've been running companies in the tech world. I like working with people. You can't, do it alone in the tech world, right? Why should it be any different with music? And then I looked at professional athletes and I said, all the best athletes in the world, Roger Federer, Tiger Woods, you name it, they all have full-time coaches. Why do they have full-time coaches? Why do they need a full-time coach if they're the best in the world? Well, that's precisely why they're the best in the world, because they do have someone that's constantly pushing them, having them look at their craft from different vantage points to always evolve and grow. And that's what keeps them competitive and at the edge of their game. I said, why should it be any different with music? Why should we study in college and then that's it? Why not have an ongoing mentorship and coaching? So I reached back out to my coach that I studied with a million years earlier. And he at the time was living in Munich. And I happened to be going to Europe. I said, I'm going to come visit you. I went to see him in Munich. He was living on the outskirts of Munich. And he was at a point in his life where he was ready for a change too. And we said, why don't you try moving to Los Angeles? Come for a month and just see how it is. And he came for the month and became my full-time coach. The month went so well, he went back, sold all his belongings, got rid of his place, and relocated to Los Angeles in my guest bedroom.
Wow.
Sold all his furniture, all his earthly possessions, and he came with a suitcase of clothes and like 10 books of music scores. That's what he came with.
That's amazing.
And he became my coach. We started playing for hours and hours a day, and we continue to train today because the journey of learning in music is a lifetime pursuit. It's probably a multiple lifetime pursuit. And so you're never done with it.
No doubt.
And the beauty of music compared to sports is that you can keep getting better and you can play till you're 120. So it just keeps going. And so then I did the first event in my living room here in Los Angeles. And that was after a year of training. I said, now I'm ready.
Okay.
And then and during the day I would, transition the business stuff and I would manage that. And in the evenings we'd play till midnight. And then after a year of that, I said, okay, it's time to put it out there and see what people think. And so I organized the first event in my living room, about 40 people, friends and friends of friends. And I said, let me just see what they think. But I want to have a name for this thing, not just come see Murray play. So it's an experience I want people to have. And so I said, well, what's the experience? Well, it's like going on a journey kind of in your head, and the name Mind Travel was born. And so I invited people to the first Mind Travel, and they all came. And afterwards, I asked a friend to use a video camera to just get some 1-minute thoughts, one-on-one from people. Yeah. And mostly people I didn't even know. So they gave their thoughts. The next day, I sat and watched about 15 of these. And I was moved by how much they were moved. And it really was something special. Because it wasn't a normal concert, right? Where I play some pieces and, there's clapping in between each. Yeah. This experience is a long format experience. From first note to last note is uninterrupted. It's an hour long sometimes or more. And it just continues to open up. And you're talking about creating a long form experience in an age where people's attention is like 6 seconds. Yeah. So that was incredibly counterintuitive.
Right, but at the same time, getting people to disconnect.
Exactly.
You're giving them a gift.
Exactly.
Because we are wired to the fucking devices. We're addicted. Right. It's hard to disconnect.
Exactly. It resonated. People got it. And then that led to another one. And looking back now on the last, 5-6 years of doing this, I've done over 500 live concerts. Wow. We've reached over 100,000 people live.
100,000 people.
Live with this experience. Taken it to dozens of cities and countries.
And they're intimate experiences.
Well, it's a combination. So they started out intimate, and then a lot of them have grown. But I always do a combination of intimate ones and then some larger scale ones. So, we'll have 1,000 people at Central Park. We'll have, 500,000 person theater audiences.
I remember watching you at Burning Man. Recently, that was so special.
I mean, at Burning Man,
there was not enough headphones for the people.
We'll easily play for thousands of people at Burning Man, but all of these experiences are about how do you create something expansive, create wonder, and connect people with that deepest part of themselves that kind of really knows that we often lose touch with because of our busyness and our distraction. But when we get back in touch with that, we're able to choose from a freeing place. And that's really our truest self. And I know what it feels like to choose from that place. I also know what it feels like to not choose from that place. And they're very different feelings, and they have very different results in our lives. So if I can put people back in touch with that, then no matter what they're going through in the moment, whether it's relationship, career, personal in any way, they can choose to bring that to that moment. And so that's really the aspiration of this. And whether they need healing or some creative burst or inspiration, it's all available in the music.
Yeah. Wow, love it. And I love the depth of experience that can be so different for everyone that's listening at the same time.
Right. And then to your point of the different formats of it, it's all about kind of creating, transporting people. So if we're in a theater, we're going to have visuals on the screen, and we're going to create magic in that beautiful black box of a theater. If we're going outdoors, whether it's at the beach, by the ocean or Central Park.
In the pool.
Right, we're going to give people access to nature and open them up. We're going to go for hikes to the top of mountains, right? So it's not just a musical journey, but it's a physical journey, engaging our bodies and our minds and our souls and just opening it all up. So just creating true transcendence in these experiences. The water one is just phenomenal. I mean, we created the largest underwater concert ever created. 200 people floating and swimming underwater with underwater speakers that I'm playing live piano to. Like,
Yeah, that was primal, man, being under there and having it just move through your body.
The vibrations go right through you, and sound travels more efficiently in water. So you just become one with the music. The music is literally going right through you. So really, really powerful stuff. So all these different formats, I'll keep innovating it. I'll keep kind of challenging myself and pushing the creative limits, but also pushing kind of the experiential limits, right? Of how deeply can we open up our consciousness to take in more, to absorb more, to be more.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I love about you is you're not afraid to push the boundaries and make a bold leap.
Yeah.
And I remember the last time we were talking, you told me a story about something that happened. I think you bought a one-way ticket to Crazy Island or something like that.
Yeah, my reckless youthful days.
Yeah. So was that before you founded EarthWeb?
Yeah, that was a little before that.
Okay.
So I just graduated high school at the time, so I was 18, and I was starting NYU. And during my first semester of NYU, I was going to my classes. And I felt like I was just a number, big lecture halls, and I was just a cog in the machine. And I just, didn't feel like this was exciting in any way. And so I had left Brooklyn, where I was from, and I always wanted to get out of Brooklyn. I grew up in an Orthodox, very religious, very controlling community. And I went to a private Jewish, very strict Jewish school. And it was something I always just needed to kind of find my way out of. It just didn't speak to me from a spiritual point of view. And so, as we talked about before, I started to read all these texts and books and immerse myself in different traditions. And there wasn't the environment back then that we have today. It wasn't as easy to find community around some of these things. So today you can find a meditation studio, you can go to all the, you can find lectures about this, communities around this. It was almost like I was in this hidden world and had to seek out these pockets of people that were interested in it. It wasn't as accessible to me back then many years ago. And I knew I needed to get out of Brooklyn and just explore the world. So, okay, I graduated going to NYU. Now I'm going to, I made it from Brooklyn to Manhattan, but that's only about 20 miles. So I started NYU and I felt like I needed to go further. I needed to see and taste the world fully. And so I remember looking at my globe on my desk. I probably got it from my bar mitzvah, these spinning globes. Yeah. We all had one. And I just said, what's the furthest place on the planet from Brooklyn, New York? And I looked around the other side and I saw, Australia, New Zealand, the South Pacific. I was like, that's where I'm going. And I remember going to Qantas Airlines. Now remember, no internet, no Expedia, no place to buy stuff online.
Did you have to go to a travel?
You got to go to a physical travel place. Okay, you got to go buy the ticket in a physical place. So I went to Qantas Airlines office. I'll never forget it, on 5th Avenue, 45th Street.
And what I think is the best part, just to put in more context, you had to use a globe to figure out what was so far. There was no Google.
No Google.
And no one owns the world map, but everyone's got a globe. And that's how you figure out.
Yeah, every kid's got a globe.
You had a globe and you actually had to use it.
I actually used it very effectively.
Yeah.
So I go to Qantas Airlines and I'm like, I want to go to Australia. And they said, okay, well, we have this very special flight deal. It's 7 stops for the same price. Here's all the places you can go. You might as well take advantage if it's the same price. I said, sounds great. And I looked at the list, and geographically, the first stop was Fiji. I said, sounds great. So they gave me my one-way ticket. And I went back home. I packed a backpack. I went to my parents' house, kind of collected my things, and I said goodbye to my parents, but they thought I was just going back to my dorm room at NYU. So they didn't know that I was about to embark on this across the world trip.
And there's no Instagram, so it's not like they're going to see you posting selfies.
They're not going to see anything. They're not going to know.
So,
and I felt like if I told them they would stop me at all costs.
Yeah.
And, at the time, I felt like I needed to really kind of plant my flag of independence and kind of stake out my own ground as a person in my own way. And today, looking back, of course, it's a terrible thing to do to your parents where they don't know where you're going in an age where you can't easily track people. But it's something I felt like I had to do at the time to kind of forge my own path.
Sure.
And, years later, I mean, we reconciled all of it, and and we're all very close. But it was a very difficult time in our relationship back then. So I said goodbye to them, and only I knew that I wasn't going to see them anytime soon. And took my backpack, got on the plane. I remember, just being so emotional on the plane because this was the beginning of some new unknown path in my life. And I landed in Fiji with no plan. I had just read a guidebook, the Lonely Planet guidebook on the plane. I had a long flight to read, and I just read about it, and I didn't have a place to stay. I didn't know anybody. I just had a little bit of money I had saved from working part-time and some bar mitzvah money of mine.
Wow.
And the bar mitzvah money I had just come into my name because I just became, I was a minor, literally a few months earlier.
That's why you didn't tell the parents. Don't tell them you're blowing that bar mitzvah money.
So the bar mitzvah money was put into my name literally just months earlier.
Wow.
And I took some $1,000 from my bar mitzvah account, and I got on a plane. And I land in Fiji, and I'm on this bus going from the, one town to the other. It's one of these old rickety buses, windows down,
people
dust
carrying
coming
chickens.
in, all kinds of stuff going on the bus. It's painted 12 different colors. And I get this tap on the shoulder, and I turn around, and it's this awesome, huge, bright smiled, beautiful Fijian man. And he, with his accent, he goes, "Where are you from?" And I tell him I'm from New York, and he goes, "New York, I always want to go there." And we get into this whole conversation, and by the time we get off the bus, he says, "You must go to my village, where I'm from, in Fiji." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "But I remember reading in the books that some of the villages tourists are not allowed to go to because they're remote and there's no resources, so they don't allow you to go there." He goes, "Don't worry." He writes a note in Fijian. I have no idea what it says. And he says, "You give this to them when you get there." His name was Waisake, and he writes it. I can see he signs it Waisake, but the rest of it I couldn't understand.
Okay.
And most of them spoke English there because the British had occupied Fiji for many, many years and educated and brought missionaries and all that kind of stuff. So he says, "Come with me." After the bus ride, we went to the fishing port. And he takes me to this little fishing boat with a father and two teenage sons. And they did not speak English, but he communicated with them where to take me. He says, "They will take you." And he bids his farewell, and he walks off. And now I place my backpack on this little boat. The boat's probably about 20-something feet with one little outboard engine and one little covered little room. And I figured, okay, a couple hours we'll be there. How far could it be? So we get in the boat, 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours. 2 days later.
2 days?
Days later, we end up on this.
Wait.
Yeah.
Where did you sleep? What did you eat?
So,
did you start talking in sign language? Tell me about this boat
without
trip,
the ability to really communicate in any way. Broken, I had a little dictionary.
Did you try asking them how long?
There's no Google Translate.
After the first 8 hours?
Yeah, there's nothing. And I realized I didn't really have any food with me. What am I going to eat? So after every now and then, he would stop in the middle of the ocean, and he would just stop, and then the two sons would jump overboard with masks and fins and a spear. And I'm not talking about a spear gun. It's not no hydraulics, no projectile. Okay, it's just a stick, a sharp stick, and they would somehow come up with little tropical fish at the end of it, and we would boil those fish. By the way, I've tried this. Okay, out of survival. Okay, I tried to swim with a stick and spear fish swimming. It must be the hardest thing
Wow.
ever to do. If I was left to my own devices, I would not make it.
Did you get into a rhythm after a little while, or was it all still like panic? Because I would have been panicking.
You know what? I think it was just the kind of overall combination of naivete with some unfounded trust in the universe that I just had.
I guess you panic less when you're young. Like if that had happened to me when
think
I was
so.
18, I'd be panicking less than if it happened like tomorrow.
Because you don't even know at that age what could befall you.
True, true.
So,
yeah.
So
you haven't seen the Titanic. Yeah.
Right. The movie didn't come out yet.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I just was going along with it and just going with it because look, I didn't have anywhere to be, and so I was just where I was. I was not going to be late for anything. There's nowhere to go. So that was a lot of the non-panicking and the ease was just built in to what I was doing, which was just there to experience. That was the whole purpose of it. I had no return date. I didn't know when I was coming back, if I was coming back. There was no boundary on the other side.
Yeah. Amazing.
So, which is very rare for us to be in that position these days. I mean,
Absolutely.
very, very rare to be in that position. You have to really create that consciously for you to be in that position. So we would just boil some rice and these fish and eat them. And then he'd pull over to like the nearest island and we just sleep on the beach and then keep going.
Oh, okay.
That's what we did. And then finally, we approached this one island after 2 days of traveling, and he gestures for me to get off. So, okay, I figured it must be here. So I jump off, and I'm holding my backpack in, chest-deep water, and they drive off. They motor off, and I'm left on this beach. Now, I turn around. There's nothing on this beach. It's just palm trees and sand. There's no structures, there's no buildings, there's no houses, there's nothing there. And I do not know where I am. I have no idea on a map where I am. I have no idea anything. I woke up on the beach, put my bag down, and I'm just kind of standing there, catching my breath. And out of the trees, 3 men appear. And they start approaching me. And I quickly search for the letter that Waisake had wrote me.
Yeah, before you get
Which
speared
was-
like a fish.
Which was, thank goodness, in a Ziploc bag.
Okay.
So I grab the letter, I open the letter up, and as the men approach, I hand them the letter. Because the first question they said was, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" They did speak English.
They did, okay.
They were educated by the British.
Okay.
And so I showed them the letter. The main guy, who was the biggest guy, clearly one of the leaders, read the letter, and he turns to me and he says, Waisake has sent you. Come with us. And a big relief, and I'm like, okay, I'm okay. Because who knows what the letter could have said. And
Fresh meat. Yeah.
fresh meat.
You owe me.
He's got some cash.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So they lead me down this path, and after a few minutes, the pathway opens up, and I see this incredible village in the middle of this island, living traditionally. There's no electricity, there's no running water. They live in huts that they make themselves. It's about 143 people that live in this village as a collective, as a true collective.
Wow.
They barter with other islands. They do the farming, the fishing, everything collectively. When I was there, one of the families needed a new home. Their hut was falling apart. Everyone in the village came together to build it, right? Carrying the logs, thatching the weave, putting it all together. So it was just an incredible experience. And I ended up, what I thought would be a 1 or 2 week trip in Fiji to sit on the beach before I go to Australia on that ticket that I bought from Qantas, ended up being a 4-month journey, living traditionally.
You lived there for 4 months?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was just life-changing, just totally transformative. To be with people that were so accepting and to just see how they lived, to wake up early in the morning, go to the farms, live their way of life, take the break in the afternoon when it gets too hot out, and then resume in the afternoon, and then at night, sitting around in circles every night, telling stories, just sharing stories in circles every single night.
And they speak English among themselves?
They spoke English more since I was there.
Okay, got
You know,
it.
so I'm sure they spoke more
Yeah.
English because I was around.
Oh, man,
But
what
I
a
got to
special
sit
experience.
in their schools, and you know, the kids, and I got to live their life every day. So you know, when I first got there, I would go for a run on the beach in the morning, just as a, you know, kind of thing an American does, go for a run on the beach.
Yeah.
And when I came back, the first time I did it, they all came over to me and they said, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "Well, we saw you running. We saw you running. Is everything okay?" They did not understand the concept of running for exercise. If you run, you have to be running away from something or running to catch something. I mean, what, you know, why would you be running?
Oh, man, that's so,
So
funny.
I was like,
yeah.
okay, I'm in a different place right now. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Well, I read Phil Knight's book recently,
Uh-huh.
and he talks about early days of Nike.
Yeah.
Well, actually, before Nike, when he was in track and field
Right.
in high school, when he would run on the street, people would go by and throw cans and
Wow.
stuff at the runners
Right.
because it was a weird thing to do, to just jog down the
It's
street.
really a relatively new phenomenon.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I had that experience, and
Man.
but truly became kind of this home away from home for me. And then finally, I was like, okay, I need to call my parents. I need to reconcile, and I think I've made my point. I need to like clean that up. And so I'll never forget the phone call, and you know, they just broke down in tears, you know, just knowing that I was alive and okay.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and so I actually made the choice to come back and reconcile with them, and then fly back and continue my trip. And then when I continued, so after we reconciled and everything was, you know, like, I just made it clear I wanted to continue this trip, but now I had their somewhat blessing to do it, and had reconciled all that. But it was clear that, you know, I was going to lead the life I wanted to lead, my own life, that my journey was mine, and I, you know, came clean about, you know, religion, and that, you know, I was pursuing my own religious path in my own way in terms of spirituality and wherever it took me. And, you know, to their credit, they were very open and accepting. And to them, the most important thing was, are you a good person? You know? And that's truly what Judaism teaches at its core, is that are you showing up in the world as a good person? And whether you follow this rule or that rule is really secondary to being a good person, valuing family, and doing good for people, being of service. Something we call in Judaism tikkun olam, which is kind of bringing remedy to the world in your own way, right? Are you bringing some type of benefit to the world in your own expression? And so that was always my guiding principle. And so when I set off for the second time now, it was with, you know, love and support. And I wrote letters to them after that point. Now, again, no email, right? So I would have to write a letter, put it in a post box, and it'd take 3 weeks, you know, to get there. But that's how I communicated with them, you know, from that point on, with an occasional collect call when I was able to, you know, from the other side of the world. But then when I continued that journey, I said the best way to really see and experience the world is actually on a bicycle. And I had realized that because when you take trains and cars to get from one place to the other, the landscape moves by very quickly.
Yeah.
And if there's something you want to see or taste or smell or get more intimate with, most of the time you won't stop because there's too much momentum.
Right.
So, and most of the time your windows are closed, and you're actually basically in a TV set, right? The whole world's kind of like a TV show.
Yeah.
And it just lacks intimacy. Now, the best thing to do is to walk everywhere, but that would take an extraordinarily long time. So I felt like that would just be too slow. And then a bicycle came to mind. I said, well, if you're on a bicycle, you're actually moving at a fast enough pace to kind of get somewhere, but slow enough where everything is just a quick break, you know, quick brakes on your bike. And when I say bicycle, I don't mean a motorcycle. I mean like a bicycle. So I got a bike, and with my backpack and little panniers, and I set out on my journey and continued. After Fiji, I went to New Zealand, then Australia, then Southeast Asia, and I rode that bicycle over 10,000 miles.
Wow.
In all these remote places, and had adventures, truly adventures of a lifetime.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And the thing about mind travel is it is you playing live,
Right.
unscripted.
Yeah.
It's not a push button recording.
That's
it's
right.
not even reading music.
Right.
It's just you in the moment playing live, and now I see.
Yeah, because everything
about
was
your
always
journey, yeah.
was always an improvisation. It was always about what's the relationship with what you encounter, and that's what I love about travel, right? Traveling is so exciting because you're experiencing something, in many cases, for the first time, whether it's a culture, a person, a place, a scenic landscape, and you're engaging in some relationship with it.
Yeah.
And so there's this exchange, and we come to learn that everything in the universe is relational. Nothing exists in isolation. Nothing is separate. Everything is a relationship.
Yes.
We only actually can be aware of our existence because of relation. It's our senses interacting with stimulus. If all of our senses were to spontaneously, right now, all your senses shut down. You have no sight, you have no hearing, you have no smell, you have no sense of touch, your nervous system's shut down, like you have no taste, no senses. You would have no way of experiencing the world. You might have a thought, but what is it? You're floating in an endless abyss of no sense of anything. So there's no true reality for you. There's no reality for you. So everything is about these experiences, this interchange of stimulus and information going back and forth. And so improvisation at the piano is this ultimate metaphor for that. See, if you're playing something memorized, that would be the equivalent of walking through life and in every scenario you find yourself in, saying a pre-memorized script in that moment. You go to the coffee shop and you say a pre-memorized script. You go to the work, you say pre-memorized script. You go to coffee with a friend, you say pre-memorized script. You have a conversation with your partner, pre-memorized script. The truth is, a lot of us are going through life saying pre-memorized scripts.
No doubt.
And more or less, right? But what if everything was truly an improvisation? Well, what does that mean? Well, that means you have to be in the most intense, active listening in the moment that you're in out here, right here, in this moment. Because if you're not, things are moving too quickly. At the piano, things are moving too quickly. I'll completely fall apart if I'm not actually listening to what I'm playing to know what to play next. Each note informs the next note.
Yeah.
So in life, if we're present, each action, each reaction informs the next one, and we get into this virtuous cycle. If we're too much back here in our head, and if that's where reality is for us, then we're somewhere else, and we're disconnected from the person, and there's no energy, and it's dead, right? And if we're here and engaged, right, then it's about response. And you can say and do anything in this space right here. There's nothing else going on. It's right here. So how do we maintain that place as often as we can? And that's this kind of being in awareness throughout our day-and-day interactions. Whatever it is, right? Not just the important stuff.
Yeah.
It's the, ordering the coffee at this coffee shop. It's everywhere. It's walking across the street, being aware of everything and being in deep listening to everything around us.
Yeah, I love that. I went to India with a spiritual guru that Sarah's been working with for many years. And one of the meditations he led us through, he had us repeat the mantra, I am awareness.
Yeah, beautiful.
And it just really makes you like feel that we are these sensory creatures at our very core. And we are just taking in all of these sounds, sensations, feelings, tastes, touch, smells. And if you get on autopilot, you're shutting all of that off, which is life. You're like saying no to life itself.
That's right.
To be a drone. And
that's right. Life happens out here. That's where life's happening.
Yeah.
Life's not happening in the far regions of our brain,
Yeah, your brain's
in our
only in the
thoughts
past or future, or it's not right here.
That's right.
Right here, you're not in your head.
And look, our brains are incredibly useful tools, but we must see them as a tool, right? They're incredibly useful tools if you want to build bridges, if you want to build skyscrapers, if you want to have incredible ideas. But ultimately, they're just a tool. And like all tools, they have their limitation. And so just like having a hammer in your hand, right? Now, there's a great saying, I think it was by Maslow, who actually coined this notion of the law of the instrument, right? The law of the instrument states that whatever instrument you have, you will see everything through the lens of that instrument. Now, if you're holding a hammer, right, then the saying is, oh, if you have a hammer, then everything becomes a nail. You just want to hammer everything. Everything becomes a nail. Same with the brain. We have a predisposition as being human, and probably because of thousands of years of evolution, we're constantly evaluating everything from a survivalistic point of view.
Yes.
So that means that all the stimulus coming in has to be filtered through the lens of, am I going to be okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So now all this stuff's coming in, and all we're thinking is the worst case scenario all the time, right? And so that is the law of the instrument at play. Now, it's typically helpful. It's historically been helpful.
Right.
It's got us here. And it's very useful a lot of the times. It's also incredibly unuseful a lot of the times.
Right.
Because it creates a completely false narrative that we can easily believe. And that's where emotional states, which then lead to stress and anxiety and what we call problems, all come from. A faulty, or I should say, unuseful thought pattern. So,
Or maybe overused, would you say also? Because I find that if you're too in your head,
yeah,
you're out of your body and you're out of your heart. You're just like
right. You're not out here again. You're not
intellectualizing
right here.
everything.
Right. So if you actually look at any problem in life we have, right, which has stress and anxiety around it, and you reverse engineer it all the way back, you'll find a thought pattern that is unhelpful. And the thought pattern will engage some kind of feeling, some emotional state, right? It could be anxiety if it's future related, right? Anxiety is basically some fear we have projected onto our future. It could be guilt, which is the same thing but for the past, right? It's some fear that's projected onto our past. And all kinds of other things. There's shame and all kinds of other fears. And so that's typically tied to some faulty or unuseful thought pattern, which then creates the emotion, which we don't realize is temporary. All emotional states are fleeting.
Yeah.
You feel this way, then you don't feel this way, you feel this way, you don't feel this way. That's what they're for. They come and they go like waves. But we so self-identify with the emotional state that we become attached to it. And then it propagates the same thoughts again, which propagates the same emotion, and you get into a negative loop.
Vicious cycle.
Vicious cycle.
Yes.
And so stress and anxiety comes from being in that loop. But if we start to bring our rational mind, which is something that we can say, okay, I see what this tool of the brain is doing, and I'm not going to identify with it. It's very hard to stop it. It's too bound in our genetic makeup to stop it. But we can be evolved enough to see it and for what it is and say, okay, got it. Thanks for that input.
Yes.
I'm not going to take the advice.
Yeah, I think it's Eckhart Tolle says, you are not your mind.
You're not your mind, right? You're not your thoughts. You're not your emotions.
Yes.
They're data points. They could be helpful in the moment. Let them pass. Let them happen. And you can choose how to have that relationship with your own thoughts. We are not our actual thoughts and emotions. And that's a critical life lesson because once you get that, then tons of new possibility opens up. Stress and anxiety can fall away. And all kinds of problems you thought were problems simply become, yes, things you have to address. But there's a big difference between having to address something, take action on something from a place of empowerment than having to feel the overwhelming stress and anxiety because it's a problem that you have to contend with. Same action you'll have to take anyway. So why not have that empowerment around it versus that disempowerment around it? And then have all the other negative effects, which of course are disease states and all kinds of bad stuff that happens with us, right? So it's all in our control. But it's a question of how do we relate to our inner world and the inputs that are coming in? You know, are we regulated by the external? Is it affecting our internal, right? So sometimes things will happen and it affects our emotional state versus our emotional state being governed by our internal strength and confidence. And that really includes both extremes. When I say both extremes, I mean good things that happen as well as negative things that happen. So it's one thing to say, and I think everyone would agree, like, okay, something negative happens in your life. Let's just say you start a company and it fails, right? So I think a logical person would say, okay, yes, the company failed doesn't mean you as a human being are a failure, right?
Yeah.
Some people will feel that regardless because they believe their internal narrative, because their narrative will say you're a failure, don't do that again, right? But a lot of people will say, okay, just because the company failed doesn't mean you're a failure. Okay, great, check. But what about the opposite? What if you have a massively successful company, right? It's still an external event that has happened,
Yeah.
right? You made all this money, you have all this accolade, all this success. What's the impact on your internal state? Well, it's very tempting to say, well, I'm a winner, I'm fantastic, I'm this, I'm that, all these glorious things. You have all this evidence to the case.
Yes.
But it's still affecting your internal state in the same way that the failed company did. It's actually the same thing. And one will set up the other. See, because if you suddenly feel great about yourself because of some win, some good news, then the second something turns sour, you'll be equally affected in the opposite direction. You won't suddenly become like all evolved and say, oh, that's not going to affect me.
Yeah.
So it's equally important to recognize that we must not be affected by external inputs into activities, into our internal state. That must come from within. Our sense of self must come from within, good or bad. The second we can do that, then we can navigate any life situation with ease, because we're not at the mercy of the externality.
Yes, and you're not looking for these social factors or monetary factors to say you're good enough.
Exactly.
It's got to come from in you.
Exactly. So these are the critical discoveries that everyone has to really have for themselves. It's something that's hard to learn. You can read it.
Yeah.
You can hear people talk about it.
You can know it to your core.
You can
and
know
it's
it.
still going to be a struggle.
It'll still be a struggle.
But that's the game.
Right.
And it's just like music, you just keep improving, keep improving.
You keep practicing it. Keep practicing it and practicing it. And that's what life is. It's just an endless sequence of events where we're just practicing, hopefully getting better, stumbling many times, and hopefully having good friends along the way to remind us of who we are.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
Man, thanks so much for being on the show, Murray.
Thank you, Craig. Awesome.
So people need to go to Mind Travel and experience this live. Is it mindtravel.com?
Mindtravel.com, and on Instagram, you can check out at Murray Hidary, and just come be part of the family, come have the experience, and just come be in the music with us.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks so much, man.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching. If you want to hear a story that's even wilder than that one, click here. You only have 5 seconds though. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go!